Do you know where you are right now? Some of our visitors are like, I thought this was a Catholic church, not so sure anymore. No, sorry. Do you know where you are? Do you know what's happening here and why? All right, we know that we're required to attend Mass on Sunday, but why? Like, what's God's agenda? I don't know if you've ever thought of that. What's the big deal? Because can't we just find God wherever we want? As some country artists have suggested, can't I find God listening to the radio in my car? Or as others have said, I feel close to God in the mountains? That's great, please. That's awesome. But like, why this? And also, why the Catholic Mass? Why not just any church? Why don't we just go looking around town for, the best preacher, the best music, best children's program, who has donuts after every Sunday Mass, not just a couple of them? Like, we know people that have made their decisions based on those kinds of qualities. And it breaks my heart every time, because when people walk away from the Catholic Church, they're not just walking away from this form of hanging out together on Sunday mornings. Right? They're walking away from the single greatest event, the single greatest miracle, the most incredible and amazing thing that happens in this universe. And I mean that very literally. But why? What's happening here? Where are we? So as we get to the close of these first 4 weeks of rerouting, this is kind of like the introductory weeks. Next week we'll start the great story of what's truly going on. But as we get to the close of these first initial weeks, we want to take just a little bit of time today to understand and to talk about, well, what is the Mass? What is going on here on Sunday mornings? Why is this such a big deal? What's God's agenda? As a few weeks ago, I was sitting on a transatlantic flight to Israel to make my pilgrimage there in Israel. And I don't know if you know this, but it takes more than 15 minutes to cross the pond. So you got some time on your hands. And luckily, United just placates all their passengers and calms them down with magic little screens in front of them. And it's just like, calm down, little piggies, calm down. And we do. We're very good at just watching our movies the whole time. Luckily on this flight, they had some good ones. And one of the movies I was able to watch was, to this day, probably one of the most powerful depictions of what's going on here at the Mass. It really just gives a great image of what's going on when we come to Mass. And surprisingly, maybe, that movie is Saving Private Ryan. And I'm going to spoil it for you today, but to be fair, it came out in 98. That's when I was 5, and you've had 25 years to watch it, so this is your own fault at this point. It got nominated for an Academy Award. This isn't like a really unknown movie. Everyone knows about this. So, if you haven't seen it though, Saving Private Ryan is a movie loosely based on a true story about a soldier and 3 of his brothers, also soldiers, all fighting during World War II. And so as the movie opens up, it's 1944. D-Day has just happened. And as the movie gets going, the plot is, these 3 brothers have been killed in action. And their mother has received a letter for each one of them. And when the War Department finds out about this, instead of letting this woman possibly lose her last son, leaving her without children, they decide, we're going to go get that boy, and we're going to send him on home to mama. And so they send out this ragtag group of soldiers to go get him, and to go rescue this guy. Their job is to save Private Ryan. Okay, that's their job, though, is to rescue him, to save him, so as to bring him home. Spoiler, they find him, they get him, okay. But only after what? Only after several men, the majority of the men in this group have actually died in their attempt to go rescue him. And as the movie closes, it's the death of the captain of this group of men, Captain John Miller. He's dying there on a bridge. And over the course of this movie, over 2 hours long, most of the movie's about him. It's pretty much a story about him. We've come to know this man, this Captain John Miller. We've come to know that he's just an incredibly good man. He's just filled with integrity and filled with honor. The movie is just tracing what he has gone through, what he has suffered, the sacrifices he has made in order to go look for this Private Ryan. And so here in this closing scene, he's wounded in battle, he's dying. And as he's dying, he grabs Private Ryan and he just says, James, earn this. And you can't hear, the battle's going on. He's like, what, sir, what'd you say? And he says it again, earn it. That's when the movie, the scene, it fades, and all of a sudden we see a much older, very old Private Ryan, and he's standing at the cemetery in Normandy at a grave, at the grave of his friend. He's standing at the grave of this man who died for him so that he might live. He's standing there at the grave of the person who died for him so that he could be standing there with his wife and his children and his grandchildren that we see in the movie. And we discover at this point then that this whole movie has actually just been a flashback, right? It's something that took place in his memory as he was standing there contemplating the grave of this friend who died for him. Ryan, Private Ryan isn't standing there super bored and detached, checking his watch, just like, man, I hope I get to leave this grave soon. No, he's just overwhelmed. He's just thoroughly caught up in this moment because here is this one who died for him. And he knows that he owes everything in his life to him. And as he's standing there, he says these words, every day, I think about what you said to me that day on the bridge. And I've tried to live my life the best that I could. In other words, I have never forgotten. I have never forgotten what you did for me. I have always remembered the sacrifice that you made for me so that I could live. And I've tried to live my life in a way that's worthy of that sacrifice you and the other soldiers made for me. Again, it's just an incredibly powerful scene, but why? Why does it stir so much up within us? Why does it make grown men cry? Well, it's because all of a sudden we see an example in real life of what responding to someone who laid down their life for you looks like. We see what it looks like what it does to someone when a person has literally given their life for them. And if something like that happened to us, again, maybe some of us do have that experience, right? Maybe not in war, but maybe maybe someone donated a kidney to us to save us. Maybe someone pushed us out of the way of a bus, right, to save us. But some of us may even know that experience of knowing I owe my life to this person. So, and that's great. But as awesome and as moving as those scenes in those movies are, what's happening here at Mass is more moving. It is more powerful. It is more dramatic. And it also has the potential to be life-changing if we had the eyes to see what's going on. Why? Because, Saving Private Ryan is a cool flashback. I mean, it's just like all of this stuff just floods back to him. He has this incredible experience of what happens, of just what had happened to him. But at the Mass, this isn't just some flashback. It's so much more powerful than that. But tragically, sadly, heartbreakingly, to our own shame actually, very few Catholics know that. When I ask most Catholics what goes on Sunday mornings here, usually the answer I get is, well, it's the Catholic version of what Christians do on Sunday mornings. Sing some churchy songs, say some churchy words, read some churchy Bible stuff, listen to somebody talk about something that probably doesn't make sense, crackers and juice, I'm out of here. It's like, it's heartbreaking. Every time that we come to Mass, though, we hear some very famous words from Jesus himself. You've probably heard them. We hear the words, "Do this in memory of me." And as you know, my biggest complaint is translation. That's just a terrible translation. And it's just hard because that word memory, do this in memory of me, it's just an impossible word to translate because in Greek, in the Jewish language, in the Jewish understanding, that word doesn't just mean memory and remember, and that's a nice thought. It means when you do this, what you're enacting, this what you're remembering actually becomes present again. And how do I know this? How am I not just making this up? Because Jesus himself, when he said these words, he said them in a very Jewish context. He said them at the Passover meal with his disciples at the Last Supper. And so what were the Jews talking about? Well, Jesus, he's simply taking on their understanding, this very same worldview that they had. We all know the story of the Bible well enough to know that at the center of the Old Testament is an event. At the center, the heart of it is the event of a great rescue from slavery. We call it the Exodus. Thank you. Yes, the Exodus. Very famous. Moses takes them out of Egypt. Great. But that's the central event of the Old Testament. This dramatic rescue from slavery. Great. We also know, probably, that there's a meal connected to that event. It's called the Passover. At the night before they go, they're supposed to kill the Passover lamb and eat it, right? We know that. Good. But what we may not realize is that when the Jews celebrate that meal, and even to this day, when they celebrate that meal, it's not like Thanksgiving dinner for them, or it's not like the 4th of July, where it's like, remember that one time many years ago? No, when they celebrate that meal, their belief is they become partakers, they become participants in the Exodus itself. The event becomes present. In Exodus, it says, this will be a memorial for you. In the Psalms, we hear God has set up a memorial for himself. And that's that same word there, right? Anamnesis is the word. It means this event, this Exodus becomes present for you here today. That's an extraordinary belief. That's an extraordinary way to look at things. Well, then we get to the New Testament. And at the center of the New Testament, as we all know, the central event of that is what? Jesus. His life, his death, his resurrection, his ascension. We call this the Paschal Mystery, fancy words. Right? But this event is the central part of the New Testament. And this event isn't just Jesus showing up to hang out with us. It's a rescue. And Jesus saves us. He redeems us. He rescues us from sin and death and Satan and hell, like all that goes along with that. And then as we also know, because we're good little Catholics, there's also a meal connected to this event. And on the night before he dies, Jesus gathers with his disciples to celebrate a Passover meal. But then at a crucial moment, he changes things up. And all of a sudden, he takes bread and he takes wine and he says those famous words, "Do this in memory of me." You want to guess the Greek word? Exactly, anamnesis. Jesus isn't just saying, hey, take some bread and wine every once in a while and think about me. It was a good time, remember? No, Jesus is saying when you do this, the event will become present to you. You will participate in that event, the event of his cross. Again, this is extraordinary, that when we come to Mass, we're not just hanging out, but we're at Calvary itself. Like I said, though, tragically, to our shame, most Catholics have no idea about anything that I just said. No clue. We've never learned that, or just really understood or grasped the fact that when we are at Mass, we are at Calvary. We are at the cross. Here today, right, in just a few moments, we become contemporaries with that incredible and life-saving event. The sacrifice that Jesus made 2,000 years ago doesn't happen again. It becomes present. It becomes present right here, and we're there to participate in it. So again, think back to that scene from Saving Private Ryan, as Ryan's walking through the cemetery and he gets to that grave of his friend. He's just overwhelmed. Everything comes flooding back. He's in that moment again. He's like, I owe my life to this man. I live my life as a response to everything that he has done for me. But then you can also, if you've seen the movie, again, his wife and his children and grandchildren are there with him. And their attitude is not that. Like they're just kind of there because grandpa's there, and they're taking pictures and they're kind of skipping around and they're not crying. They're just like, okay, grandpa, do your thing. They don't get it. They weren't there for that original event. They never lived it. They don't have any experience remotely like that. So they're just kind of there. I think it's also just a great image for how many of us show up to Mass. Some of us, when we walk in, we are just completely transfixed by the crucifix, by the tabernacle, by this altar. We genuflect to get into our pew, not because that's the price of admission to get into have you ever done that at the movie theater? I just thought of this. Like at the movie theater, you're about to go sit in your seat and you accidentally genuflect at the movie theater. That's how you find the good Catholics at a movie theater. It's embarrassing. But no, we drop to our knees not because you have to do that in order to be allowed into a pew. We do that because we're making this great act of reverence towards this one who saved us, this one who rescued us. God's agenda, right? Why Mass is such a big deal, why it's the foundational element of our faith, is because God's trying to win our heart. He's willing to do anything and everything to win your love, not to win your butt in a pew for about an hour a week. He's willing to do anything to win your heart and your love and your affection. He's not going to show up today trying to argue with you. He's not going to fight with you about, you better love me or else. No, he is simply going to show you how much that he loves you and what he will do in order to show you that love. That's what our patron, St. Paul, he would say in his letter to the Galatians. He doesn't say, I've started following Jesus because I got pretty scared or something. No, Paul says, I live my life by faith in the Son of God. Why? Because he loved me and he gave himself for me. Galatians 2:20. He loved me and gave himself for me. And that's what changed Paul's life, is once he knew that his life was that. But many of us, we walk into the church a lot more like, Ryan's kids and grandkids. We don't experience that. We don't really experience ourselves as having been rescued or saved or anything by him. We go sometimes because grandma told us to go or because it's important to mom and we'll help out mom today. Right? But we just don't experience that. And if we don't, that's okay. This is one of the reasons why we're doing rerouting, right? We want to truly enter into that. So it's not just mom and grandma who have that experience and it's important for them, but we can be part of that as well. We can see ourselves and place ourselves in that story as well. So that when we come, it's not just, well, I better go to Mass because it's Sunday. It's, I have to go visit the one who rescued me. I owe my life to him. My entire life is for him now. Our challenge then is to truly enter into the Mass, this every single Mass. It can be this incredible life-changing event for us. But the challenge is to enter into it. So where are we? We're face to face with love and mercy itself. This is no empty ritual that we do here on Sundays. This isn't just the Catholic version of Sunday morning stuff. This is the cross. And just like the cross changed pretty much everything 2,000 years ago, it continues to do that even to this day. So today I want to invite you to do something, right? During communion, right after communion, and even for those of you that cannot for some reason today receive communion, right after communion, instead of looking around or instead of, watching people come up to communion and being like, man, they've gotten old, or, after communion, sometimes you're just watching, just like, is Father going to get the dishes done? I'll give you a hint. Me and Trey have done this before. We're going to get the dishes done just fine. It's going to happen. So instead of worrying about that, no need to worry today. Today what I want you to do after communion is to just simply go back to your pew and to just maybe even just close your eyes and to just reflect and to pray, to ask, to beg God to give you a new experience of the cross, to give you a profound experience of what happens at the cross. Just ask him, Lord, place me in that moment. Place me next to your Blessed Mother as she stood at the foot of the cross. Help me to experience the cross. Help me to experience your death as a death for me. The reason we need to do this is because it's just like Saving Private Ryan. Ryan lived his whole life based off of that simple event that happened when he was on the bridge. As his friend was dying for him, he said, earn it. And as Ryan came back to the grave of his friend, he says, I never forget those words, and I've tried to live my life as a response to them. Right, today from the cross, Jesus doesn't say earn it, because spoiler, you can't. But even for Private Ryan, he didn't really earn it, if you think about it. It already happened. But what did Captain Miller mean? He didn't mean earn it. He meant respond to this. Live your life in a way worthy of the sacrifice that all of the men and I am making for you. Make our sacrifice worth it. That's what Jesus says to us today. Respond to what I have done for you. Live your life in a way worthy of this sacrifice that God has made for you. That's what sustains us. Is that time and time again we're able to return to the event that changes our life. We're able to return to the event wherein God himself died so that we might live.